We have a very interesting panel as our third session is launched. We will hear from Harout Ekmanian, who is a journalist and a human rights activist and advocate, currently working for Human Rights Watch in New York. He has worked in several institutions. He has worked in Armenia as investigative journalist, and in 2014 he was an O'Donnell visiting lecturer in global studies at Whitman College. So, Harout. Go ahead.
Shall I?
Yes.
Thank you. So, the subject that I'm going to talk to you about is titled "The Right to the Narrative" in the case of Aleppo Armenian. Sorry. Microphone. Is it okay now? Okay. So the Aleppo Armenian community, which existed as an organized entity since the 17th century, significantly grew in number as a result of continuous streams of refugees from all over the Ottoman Empire who survived the Armenian genocide. In subsequent decades, the community morphed with changing political, social, and economic landscape of Syria. Along with the change, the community was also dynamic and on the move. Thus, the community witnessed waves of immigration as early as the 1920s. Many of those who left early on went to Europe and Americas, carrying with them the memories of refugee camps of Aleppo. Those who left in subsequent years, they moved to Soviet Armenia as well as to Lebanon and Western countries. The immigration continued at a low but consistent pace until the Syrian conflict in 2011. By 2014 already, more than 2/3 of the community was displaced, with most of the community members moving to either Lebanon or Armenia, while a smaller number managed to take refuge in Europe, North America, and Australia. Various waves of immigration formed diverse layers of Aleppo Armenian identity in the larger Armenian diaspora. The story of the Armenians in Aleppo has different beginnings and ends for each of those layers or groups. While it has no end for the small surviving mother community in Aleppo until today. Today, in the middle of the Syrian conflict, who has the right to the narratives of the community story? Is there more than one narrative? How do those narratives complement each other? What was the role of other groups in dictating narratives for Aleppo Armenians, such as media, Armenian, Arabic, international, etc.? Based on these, this paper is an attempt to explore these questions through media research and interviews and to provide an overview of the current narrative on who or what is the Aleppo Armenian, the Halepti. So I will try to talk the narratives of the story or the stories of Aleppo Armenians in media according to the sources that created them. We have several, almost 10 chapters, 10 sources. I tried to narrow them down. Because of time restrictions, some of them might seem to you very general, but no doubt that there are so many more nuances that I can present to you in 15 minutes. So the first, we start with the community newspapers or the community voices. Aleppo has a rich tradition of media and publications in Armenian language. Syrian publishers also have a great contributions in translating several Armenian literature and academic studies into Arabic. It is noteworthy that the first ever Arabic language newspaper was published by the Aleppian Armenian journalist Rizqallah Astvazadur Hassoun in 1855 in Constantinople. The Armenian dailies, currently defunct, had great run at the beginning of the 20th century. The daily Height Sign, 1918, 1919, the one every 2 days Darakir and Yeprad were among the first published newspapers in 1918-1919 period. A stream of publications followed in the 20s and 30s of the 20th century. Suryagan Surhantag, Suryagan Mamul, the dailies of Yeprad, Surya, Arevelk. The latter, Arevelk, had also its annual yearbook. Arevelk also had also published in 1956 its youth supplement, Vahakan, and its sports supplement, Arevelk Marzashkhar. These publications carried the stories of survival, as well as daily news of war and displacement. These were the years directly after the genocide, and publications like these were one of the most effective mediums for survivors to find their family members and relatives. They document the early years of the foundation of the cultural, youth, sports, women, church, and other organizations of the community. Monthly papers include Nairi in the 40s, published by Antranik Zarugyan, and Purastan youth publication in the 50s. Yearbooks include Suryahai Daretsuits in the 20s, Datev, Suryagan album, Daron, Dahai Darekirk, and Kegart from the 20s to the 40s and the 50s. I mentioned Nairi Monthly, which was published by Antranik Zarugyan. So Zarugyan's Nairi represented an extremely valuable source about the internal debates in the Aleppo Armenian community. Zarugyan's novels, Men Who Have No Childhood, Mangutyun Chunetso Martik, Aleppo of Our Dreams, Yerazain Halebe, The Last Innocent, Verchin Anmere, and other works are monumental literary works of historiography of the Aleppo Armenians in his time, written in a form of autobiography. Zarugyan grew up in the Armenian orphanage and rose to become an active young intellectual. He had the privilege to mingle with the community leadership of the 30s and the 40s, who were the generation that established the basis of the new Aleppo Armenian community after the Armenian genocide. The generation who moved from refugee camps to apartments, you could call. Many facts about the Aleppo Armenian community that has not been recorded either intentionally or unintentionally could be grasped through the writings of Zarugyan. For example, in his book, The Last Innocent, he describes a respectable Armenian army general who has the reputation of a national hero, visits Aleppo and Beirut, and puts the seeds of a structure composed of groups of young men trained for self-defense purposes. Zarugyan never mentions the name of the general, neither elaborates more on the structure. However, for the followers of the events of that time and as well as according to the oral history of the community, it is clear that the visitor was no one else than General Tro, Drastamart Ganayan, who is a prolific Tashnak leader and an Armenian national hero, while those groups that he established are the ones who defended the Armenian neighborhoods in Lebanon for 15 years during the Lebanese civil war from 75 to 1990. And those are also the same groups or their branches in Syria who are now defending the Armenian neighborhoods of Aleppo during the Syrian war since 2011. So Zarugyan was a very vocal writer who could successfully weave a narrative of the history of the community during the years that he was active in Aleppo before eventually moving to Beirut in the end of 50s. The 60s and the 70s weren't productive years for the community in terms of newspapers and media production, but the current daily, currently Kansasar Weekly is the only newspaper of the community, official organ of the Armenian Diocese of Beroia. That's how the church is called in northern Syria and based in Aleppo. It's the Kansasar Weekly that is published by the diocese. So Kansasar was the first, it was first published as under the name of Oshagan in 1978, and it was renamed Consulate in 1991. Worth mentioning that the official title, according to the license given by the government, is a newsletter. It's Nashra in Arabic. So, but de facto, it has served as a weekly newspaper. That was a trick arrangement between community leaders and the government to bypass issues of license. Other minority communities don't even have this kind of newsletter. So for the last 2 years, Consulate has been very active also on social media, publishing news about the situation of the community in Aleppo and generally in Syria during this ongoing war. Content-wise, Consulate merely acted as a local community newsletter for a very long time. There were rarely op-eds or articles that had any critical approach towards the state of affairs inside the community, let alone Syria, the region, Armenia, or the diaspora. The community had a newspaper and it didn't at the same time. In a time when journalism in the world was living extraordinary changes with technological advancement and new skills and techniques, Consulate remained firmly committed to the old-fashioned ways of a party-run newspaper. Meanwhile, the number of published books also kept shrinking in the community. There was a scarcity of intellectual debate, and community media was serving only to document every big and small event or ceremony in the community in like golden letters as success stories. Today, in the middle of the Syrian war, Consulate still operates. Writers like Levon Sharoyan, who also contributes for Marmara newspaper in Istanbul, Lala Minasyan, Manuel Keshishian, and others keep writing stories about the daily life in war-torn Aleppo. These are the times when the narrative is not about the establishment of the community, neither is development during the Cold War. These are the times when the community is suffering a slow death. One writer stands out among all of the names that I mentioned. He is Manuel Keshishian. Keshishian writes not only for Consulate, but also writes for other publications in Armenia, like Hetk and CivilNet, where his messages about the situation of the community are more direct, honest, and critical than his writings in the community newspaper, Consulate. So, I come to the second actor who creates narratives for the Aleppo Armenian community, which are the Armenians of Aleppo as a second diaspora abroad. In any group of Aleppo Armenians gathered in Los Angeles or New Jersey, the first question that pops out in the conversation is about the time of leaving Aleppo and their mutual acquaintances. Decades ago, many Aleppo Armenians moved to the west. The older it is, the weaker gets their tie to Aleppo and the memories of the city. The narrative is usually restricted to some lifestyle features, and it is paused at the date of leaving Aleppo. The story is different with those who moved to Soviet Armenia and stayed there until now. They have fully adapted and usually, wow. Okay, I'm not into the half yet. So, well, I'm gonna skip to the Armenians of Aleppo in second diaspora because they do not represent a media themselves, but they represent a valuable source for historians to complement the past narratives of the community. I'm going to jump next to the Syrian Arab state media. Since the 60s, with the rise of the Ba'ath party into power, Syrian state took charge of all press and media channels in the country, and since then there hasn't been any independent competitor in media. Syria turned into a more closed society, and during this time, media has never been one of those public domains where an Armenian should be hired to fill a certain minority quota. However, the Armenian element was represented every now and then in various occasions. The casual line was always reaffirmed the loyalty and belonging of the community to Syria and considering it as their first homeland. Besides the affirmation of Armenians being honest workers and good craftsmen. This narrative was usually parroted also by the community officials in every occasion and in community publications. Whenever relations with Turkey soar, the state media narrative about Armenians adds to it some light references to the Armenian genocide and the saving of Armenians by Arab tribes. In 1997, in a moment of near full collision between Syria and Turkey over the Kurdish issue, a popular Ramadan TV series about the First World War in Syria made an entire episode depicting the Armenian genocide. It was called Ikhwat al-Turab, the brothers of the brothers of the soil or something. Of course, that narrative has been reversed. Moreover, reference to Armenian genocide was censored from 2000 to 2011 during the period of honeymoon between Turkey and Syria. Since the start of the conflict in 2011, the Syrian state media used every opportunity to depict minorities in deep alliance with the government against Western and Gulf plots to destroy Syria. I'm using their language. Images and footage of people chanting for President Assad with flags and banners in Armenian neighborhoods were a constant feature on state media, Al-Ikhbariya, Suriya, and other TV channels. So the narrative that government tried to imply is that minorities are in danger and governments of, I need 5, I'm sorry. Sorry. The narrative that the government tried to imply is that minorities are in danger and the government is their only guarantor. However, the perceived narrative among the white segments of Syrians was a shift from good, loyal Armenians to the alliance of minorities against the oppressed Sunnis. Now I'm using the language of the opposition. It goes without saying that the link between the narrative represented by the state and its perception among the people was not an accident. It was probably intentional. For the government that is facing such an existential threat, a vulnerable group is easier to use and manipulate than a relaxed and secure one. So to a certain level, some community leaders were aware of the aforementioned fact and they were navigating their way to save some balance. After 5.5 years into the Syrian conflict, the primate of Aleppo, Aleppo Armenian Church, Aleppo Armenian Diocese, Bishop Shahan Sarkisian, is the only religious minority leader in the country who managed to not being dragged on state TV and praise the president or the government. However, on a popular level, ordinary community members were so willingly instrumentalized by the government media to enforce the latter's narrative. During the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, a Syrian TV crew was in Yerevan with the president of the Syrian parliament, and the famous anchor of the and war reporter Shadi Helwe was greeted in the streets of Yerevan as a hero. So, okay. All right, so I'm jumping next to the next actor, which is the media, which is sympathetic to the Syrian government and how they created their own narrative about the Aleppo Armenian community. So the Arabic satellite channels and newspapers sympathetic with the Syrian government, mostly based in Lebanon, are not only in line with the Syrian government's narrative about Armenians, moreover, they periodically cover news about the situation in the Armenian neighborhood in Aleppo. Some of them have sent their crews multiple times even to Yerevan to track Aleppo Armenians there and do stories about families of those kidnapped by the rebels and stories about settling in Armenia. In one news story, war reporter Ogarit Dandash, a high-profile pro-government Lebanese Al Mayadin channel reporter, makes an effort to, in order to report, in her report, to depict all the interviewees willing to go back to Aleppo at the first chance. While some of them might be true, but many of it is made up, edited, or manipulated. I have some examples that I'm not going to read them now. I'm gonna switch them. I'm gonna switch to the next factor. But I interviewed also the same people who were interviewed by the same reporter that I mentioned, and they revealed other facts and being manipulated. So I switched to the Syrian opposition media. And there was no such thing called Syrian opposition media before 2011. After the start of the anti-government movement, an army of self-described reporters appeared all over the country filming events with their phones, then starting Facebook pages, media agencies, etc. Discriminatory and sectarian speech was present in the opposition movement in the beginning, but it was extremely marginal. Later it grew to become the dominant discourse with the radicalization, militarization, and Islamization of the opposition movement. A prominent Syrian TV, a private TV station, Orient TV, operating from the Emirates, has joined the opposition movement since early 2011, and with the time it has become the standard bearer of the sectarian tune. Armenians, of course, were not spared either. The owner of this TV and the journalists, they repeatedly post in social media calls to violence against Armenians and also other minorities. So the narrative that is dictated by the Turkey and Gulf-supported Syrian opposition says that Aleppo Armenians or Syrian Armenians in general do not belong to Syria, and they should be either kicked out or slaughtered, and all their properties should be taken away. So this might sound a bit more generalization. There are a bit more nuances into that, but generally, like following the social media and following the opposition media in general, that's the general perception that you could get about all non-Sunni elements that they speak of. Yes?
Because your time is over.
Oh.
So could I ask you, maybe during question and answer?
I have just one small section. I need 3 minutes.
No.
2 minutes.
No, you already went.
I can jump to the conclusion.
Because I don't know, the organizers have their...
Well, but the conclusion is very important. I can jump over other factors and that I might not mention, but the conclusion is a bit
Can
more...
you read the last paragraph of
Yeah.
the conclusion?
Yeah, I can do that. Yes, yes. So the other actors include the Armenian media of the Republic of Armenia, which I will not read now, and the Armenian diaspora media. But I'm going to jump to the conclusions.
Last paragraph.
Yes. Yes, yes. Is there one narrative for the community of Aleppo which one represents the true nature of the community in the past and present? While several Aleppo Armenians become prominent voices when they are outside of the community, there are barely any voices that could rise to prominence from within the community inside Aleppo to be able to transfer the message and that the community has to pass to the world, and not just to the Armenian world. Since decades, the community of Aleppo Armenians suffered from lack of internal debate, scrutiny, and critical approaches to a wide range of issues, from transparency in community institutions and organizations to identity and belonging, a vision for the future of Syria, Armenia, Artsakh, and others. These were barely discussed topics, deeply discussed topics in the community through media or publications. So it is difficult to talk about narratives or claim the right to the narrative where there are no free voices to take that role. Syria has been a closed society for too long, with heavy censorship and no free expression. The Aleppo Armenian community belongs to such an atmosphere. However, if we zoom out and take a wider look into our communities around the world, even those in the West in so-called open societies, they do have similar problems. They do have also similar problems. Our institutions are undemocratic. Our media, if there is any or whatever we have any, is not up to the date in terms of universal values of freedom of thought, freedom of speech. These are still hardly won privileges in the Armenian world, both in diaspora and in Armenia. This creates a void which could be filled by other actors who dictate their own narratives to us. Thank you.